Welcome, one and all. I'm your host, Ivan Crollo, aka the Game Raging Psycho, bringing you another NerdSociety.com video, a site which you can check out down in the description below for all your geeky needs, such as TV reviews, movie reviews, comic book reviews, interviews with cosplayers, and basically everything relating to geek and nerd culture you can find at our fine site down in the description below. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a video game, which is pretty ironic considering the fact that I was brought into the site to be kind of a more video game-centered dude, but things didn't exactly go that way because I've sort of moved away from video games recently. But as I was scrolling through IGN the other day, I saw the news that Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 released a demo, and I instantly cringed because I thought that they would be just releasing this on the consoles and that us PC players would be getting the shaft. To my everlasting surprise, I actually noticed that there was indeed a PC version. So, with my hope restored in humanity, I basically went to Steam and downloaded the demo, and after installing it and playing it for about 45 to 50 minutes, I'm here to give you my impressions of what I thought. Now, before I actually tell you what the game is about and stuff, there are a couple of things I want to mention before we begin. The first thing I want to mention is the quality of my PC. The last time I upgraded my rig was 4 years ago, and while my rig was pretty damn powerful back in the good old days, today it's pretty dated, so I really can't give you that good of an idea of the visuals, except mentioning here that the visuals for what I was able to do with my rig were actually quite good, nowhere near as good as the trailers, but I'm sure that people with much more powerful PCs and on the consoles will be able to get visuals far superior to the ones I was able to get on my pretty ancient rig. Second thing I want to mention is the fact that there will be no game footage at all during this entire video. Now, if you guys are subscribed to people like Angry Joe, Total Biscuit, or basically anyone on YouTube who does video game related reviews or, thoughts on betas, basically anything gaming related, you will know that YouTube basically had this whole asinine copyright law where basically if you post any sort of game footage, it is a crime punishable by death. And since I don't want to get our site into any kind of legal bullshit with the idiots who made this just asinine copyright law, I am unfortunately just going to be putting up this picture of Dracula that you see before you through the entire video. I'm really sorry. I genuinely wanted to put footage for this one because I know it can just be kind of frustrating just staring at a picture. But if it troubles you guys that much, you can just basically go read something else or do something else on YouTube while you listen to me talk about Lords of Shadow 2 for the next 15 minutes, I guess, if it bothers you that much. And again, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to put footage on here, but YouTube is just being a bitch, and there's nothing really I can do about it. The next thing I want to mention is spoilers. Now, in order for me to give you guys a proper plot synopsis of what this game is about, I'm going to have to spoil the original. Now, I would argue the fact that I wouldn't even have to mention this considering the fact that the original came out 3.5 years ago, but I do realize that there are lots of PC players who weren't able to play the game for all this time because the PC version only came out a few months ago. I still haven't checked it out, by the way, but I do intend to do it maybe before or after Lords of Shadow 2 comes out. I'm very aware of the plot, though. So yeah, if you're someone who hasn't played the first game and you still want to check it out before playing Lords of Shadow 2, you better just leave this video right now because I'm going to spoil lots and lots of things from the original while I'm talking about the plot synopsis for Lords of Shadow 2. For those of you who know the plot or you just don't care about spoilers, please feel free to stay. So, with those notes out of the way, let's just jump right into it. So, like I said in the intro, the demo begins, at the very start of the game, where Dracula, aka Gabriel Belmont, is, just enjoying a fine cup of blood when his former allies from the Brotherhood, basically this crusader-like organization that has devoted its whole existence to the elimination of creatures who are basically affronts to God, like vampires and werewolves. And since Gabriel became a vampire, I think it was a century ago at this point, he has become an enemy of God, and by extension an enemy of his former allies. So because of this, his allies basically lead a huge army to his castle, break into his throne room, and we're basically just thrown right into the combat. And a couple of things I want to mention about the PC port itself before I really get into the combat. The PC port is really not that great, and I'm usually one of those guys who's pretty forgiving on this thing for these kinds of things, because I can even defend it here because these guys haven't really done anything on PC. You know, they did port Lords of Shadow 1 a few months ago to the PC, and they didn't really, I don't think so, that they didn't really say anything specific about, you know, really making the PC version something, you know, really spectacular or whatever. But this, and I will say that this did have lots of graphical options. So for all of you guys who just want to have your games run on like 500 frames per second on your 8 graphics card rigs, you're gonna have a blast with this game, I think. And it did have lots of audio options. But my main problem with the port, and this is one I have with a lot of games, is that whenever in this tutorial section, button prompts would show up basically telling you what was the button for a light attack, for a strong attack, for blocking and stuff, but every time they showed up, they would be shown as gamepad. Basically, right-click on the mouse is the strong attack, but it's not going to say right-click is for the strong attack. It's going to say the A button is for the strong attack. And while they did have this sort of menu where you press F5, you can see what gamepad button functions as what keyboard button, I really, really hate it when they do this kind of crap. It just makes the game unnecessarily difficult, and until I figured out that there was a menu, I was getting my ass handed to me because I was just fiddling around with the controls trying to figure out just what the fuck is what. But once I was able to figure out the controls, the combat was so satisfying, and it was actually surprisingly challenging, especially because this was like the beginning section of the game, and you were mostly just fighting grunts, and there was one boss that did show up later on. But usually when you fight grunts in these hack and slash games, you know, the grunts are basically idiots. You know, they couldn't hit you even if you stood still for 5 hours. They probably couldn't even hit you once. But in this game, I noticed that speed and properly knowing when to dodge and when to block and paying attention to what your enemies are doing at all times is key to surviving this game, because there were many instances where I would just be kind of focusing on one enemy, and then almost instantly his buddies would come from the sides and they would all attack me at once, sometimes with blockable and sometimes with unblockable attacks. And there would be lots of times where I just wasn't paying attention, and these grunts, you know, these regular soldier dudes would able to get in lots of good hits, and they would actually be able to inflict lots of damage to me. And I really, really like this, because usually I feel like hack and slash games have fallen into a rut where they just try to be the same exact thing over and over again. But here, even the lowest level soldiers had this kind of Dark Souls vibe going into it, because they would be actually constantly coming at you. They would come at you while you were focusing on one of their allies, and they would try to take you down. And these guys were pretty damn brutal. Like, these guys aren't your Assassin's Creed type of enemy who's just gonna stand there like a complete moron, and he's just gonna let you murder him and his pals like they're nobody's business. You know, these guys are going to attack you in droves, and it is very important to follow what kind of attack it is. If it's a standard attack, you can just block it. But again, even blocking has this kind of rhythm to it where if you block at the precise moment, you can give yourself an opportunity for a counterattack, and that can open up more damage-doing options. And that was really cool. I was also really pleased that they were able to give you weapons that all had their own function, but none of them really had any advantage over the other. You had this blood red whip, which probably has the most speed and range of all your weapons, but its damage is just kind of decent. It's probably the most versatile weapon in your arsenal, and you could do plenty of different combos with it. Another weapon you had was the Void Sword. Now, ironically enough, the Void Sword actually does the least amount of damage, but it is probably the most important weapon in the whole game, because every time you hit your enemy and cause damage to him, your health bar fills up. Now, this isn't the only way to fill up health. Once you do enough damage to a certain enemy, you can basically suck their blood in the form of a finisher. But these finishers only give you a small chunk of blood, and usually enemies are pretty damn tough, even the lowest level grunts, so you really gotta wail on these motherfuckers before you can drain their blood, and even then, like I said, you don't get much health back. But the Void Sword, which does the least amount of damage and is plenty slower than the Whip, it's actually probably one of the most helpful weapons I had, because when my health was running low, and there were many times during this demo where I was surprisingly getting my ass kicked. I don't know if it was because the game was difficult or because I just was out of practice because I haven't played a game like seriously in months at this point. But the Void Sword really saved my ass, and I think it's going to be easily the most integral weapon in the whole plot. Not the whole plot, the whole gameplay fighting mechanic. The last weapon was a pair of gauntlets that serve as your classic, heavy weapon that causes a lot of damage, but it's really, really damn slow. And even this weapon had its own advantage, because there were certain enemies where you got to break their armor off before you can actually hurt them. And then once their armor is gone, you can just use your standard whip, or you can use the Void Sword to heal yourself up pretty quickly if you really need to. And the Void Sword and the gauntlets have their own bars, and once this bar is lowered, you cannot use the weapon, and you got to wait for the bar to reload. Thankfully, the bar fill up rate actually feels right. They don't feel like they take too long, like they take forever to load up, or they don't feel too fast where you can just empty it and then a second later it's going to be completely full. It actually felt right, and that's one of the biggest things I was really impressed with it. That the fact that every weapon felt important. Every weapon felt like it had its own function, and every weapon felt like it can be useful in its own way. And that's one of the big problems of certain series like God of War. God of War is it's become the go-to game for all hack and slash games ever since it came out. And in God of War, you would get all these other weapons besides your Blades of Chaos, but they never really felt useful. They were maybe one or two heavy weapons, like the Cestus gauntlets in God of War 3. Those were pretty useful because they were fast and they did tons and tons of damage. But usually in God of War games, you get this big arsenal of weapons, and unless it's a puzzle or something, you really didn't find yourself using them that much. Your standard gauntlets were basically enough for you to get through the whole entire game. But in this game, I can already tell you guys that the combat feels fast. It feels surprisingly strategic for a hack and slash game, and I have to say that the versatility of the weaponry really impressed me. Going back to the visuals again, just to give you guys more details, like I said, my rig's old, but I will say that the game looked pretty damn good. I wasn't able to play it on the highest settings because the frame rate just went to hell, but the visuals, from what I was able to get to them, they felt very, very good. And I think, like I said, if you're playing this on a console or a really beefy rig, you're going to be able to get visuals equal to what you saw in the trailers, or maybe even better than that. The boss fight, which happens in the demo, it's really short. It also has this sort of Dark Sides vibe to it, bosses aren't just going to stand there and let you hit them and take away half their health bar before they finally react to you. There were many of times where I was only able to get one or two hits from a boss because the boss would react to me, and the boss would just basically push me away, so I couldn't do any damage to him. And the boss, just like the grunts, he had his own sort of pattern, but he was able to have his own kind of techniques to defend himself. And like I said, it just had this Dark Souls vibe where he was adapting his own strategy to take me down, and I thought that was pretty damn cool. Usually hack and slash boss fights are just you wailing on the guy until you can take away enough of his health to trigger a quick time event and murder him. Again, in God of War, the go-to game the go-to inspiration for hack and slash games, after its release, also suffered from these issues. But in this game, it seems like the Mercury Steam, the developers of the Lords of Shadow series, they really took notes from Dark Souls. And I thought that was for the better, because I finally got a hack and slash game for the first time in years where I actually felt like the enemies weren't just complete idiots just standing there and letting me murder them all. They felt really aggressive. They felt fast, and the same can be said about the bosses. Now, some negatives I gotta say right off the bat are I already said that the control thing was just complete bullshit. I really hate it when developers do that kind of thing. Like, why can't you just make a simple prompt that says left mouse button is attack? Why do you really have to make it like the gamepad? Another thing that annoyed me was that in the menu section you can't use your mouse. You gotta use the keyboard to scroll it. I also really don't like that. I know this is kind of a nitpick, but for the sake of convenience, I like it when it's there. One of the biggest problems I had with the game itself, in terms of gameplay, is that the platforming felt very, very loose. And now this can be either a good thing or a bad thing. Like, when you're scaling a huge-ass mech that's like wobbling around, using the environment to try and crush you while you're climbing to its top, I guess it makes sense that the platforming would be loose, because no one would be able to stick on a thing like that while it's just moving around and just trying to actively crush you. But again, when the more peaceful moments, the platforming just doesn't feel solid enough. There were just lots of times and a lot of points where I was just trying to gauge whether or not I can jump onto this thing, and then the game wouldn't really respond to me, and it just resulted in several unnecessary deaths, and that really sort of killed the momentum of the demo for me personally. And that was my only real big problem with the gameplay itself as it is. If I had to give another problem, is that I feel like the recovery for the finishers feels too small. Like, Dracula sinks his teeth into a guy's neck and he sucks out his blood. And I would think that he would get more than maybe just a little bit of health. I would, maybe this is something they can fix in time for the game, but considering the fact the game's coming out in a couple of weeks, I think it's pretty set in stone so far. I think the game actually went gold a few days ago, so this is probably not going to be fixed. But yes, that was my problem. I just feel that it's weird that Dracula gets more health back from a sword that barely does any damage than he does from sinking his teeth and sucking a guy dry of blood. That just doesn't make much sense to me, in just terms of vampire lore. And speaking of vampire lore, I was really pleased with the way they did Dracula. He's not some Twilight bullshit here. This guy is a murderer. You can just see it in his eye that when he's killing these guys, he's having the time of his life. And I just really like it that we're getting more and more vampires that are just ruthless murderers, but still have that charm and appeal that made vampires, so famous and so appealing to the mainstream in the first place. And Dracula here, in the few bits of dialogue that he has, you can just tell that he is that classic vampire, where he's that murdering sociopath, but he has this charm to him that just makes him kind of, you just kind of can't take your eyes off him. And I think that is when a vampire is at his best, and it really shows that these guys went out of their way to bring him back into classic vampire, territory that, of course, the Twilight saga bullshit completely ruined and tainted for all time. So yeah, if you guys don't already know, I really enjoyed this demo. I think it's one of the best constructed demos that I've seen, and I know one of the reasons the demos have gone away, last generation, was because it's really hard to just take a chunk out of a game and then put it out there, because if that chunk isn't good enough, it's gonna put more people off from buying the game than it's gonna make people not buy the game versus buying it, which is the demo's whole purpose. But I think this was a very well constructed demo. I had a lot of fun playing it. It was a bit shorter than I hoped it would be, but it did have enough of that bombastic action for the first half, and it did showcase the combat well enough for me to tell you guys. I think the game is shaping up very well, And I'm not telling you guys to pre-order this game because I think pre-orders are complete or utter bullshit. But once the reviews start coming out and you're getting more positive buzz from people and from critics, I recommend you guys check this game out. And if you're still on the fence on it, you can get the demo on Xbox 360, PS3, and on Steam. The demo is only about a gig and 300 megabytes big, so if you even have a decent speed, you should be able to get it done in under an hour. So yeah. Well, I lost my train of thought there. Sorry, guys. But anyway, those are my impressions for the Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 demo. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. And like I said in the beginning, you can check out our site down in the description below. There's a link down there for all your geek needs. If you want TV reviews, comic book reviews, movie reviews, interviews with cosplayers, interviews with comic book creators, even our own written storylines, like basically fan fiction, check out our site if you're interested in any of that stuff. As I said before, I'm your host, Ivan Crollo, aka the Game Raging Psycho, and I hope to see you guys on the next NerdSociety.com video. See ya.